The woman standing over her father's deathbed held a medicine glass in one hand and a lie in the other. In 3 hours, the most powerful plantation owner in Savannah would be dead. The doctor would call it pneumonia. The death certificate would say heart failure. And Elizabeth McAllister would become the only person in Georgia who had gotten away with the perfect murder. But before I tell you how she did it, I need to know something. Where are you right now? What city? What time is it where you are watching this? Drop it in the comments, because this story about family, inheritance, and cold-blooded revenge is going to take you to a very dark place, and I want to know where you started before we go there together. Now, if calculated murder and twisted family secrets are your kind of history, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel digs up the darkest true stories that got buried for a reason. And what Elizabeth McAllister did to her family over the next 4 years makes most serial killers look merciful. October 15th, 1842, Savannah, Georgia, the McAllister estate. Elizabeth Ann McAllister sat in a chair by the window in the east parlor, watching the last of the afternoon light die behind the oak trees. She was 23 years old, with auburn hair pulled back tight enough to give her a headache, and green eyes that her mother used to say were too clever for her own good. She wore a white dress with lace at the throat that felt like it was choking her. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. Everything about her posture said proper Southern lady raised to marry well and manage a household. Everything about her thoughts said murderer. The clock on the mantel showed 4:42. Her father had less than 3 hours to live. The doctors upstairs thought he had maybe 2 more days. They were wrong. Elizabeth had made very sure of the timeline. The door opened without a knock. James Thaddeus McAllister walked in like he already owned the room, because in 3 hours he would. James was her cousin, 28 years old, broad-shouldered, dark hair that was always slightly too long, blue eyes that women at church called handsome and Elizabeth called dead. He wore expensive clothes that somehow looked cheap on him. His cravat was loose, his jacket wrinkled. He smelled like tobacco and the kind of perfume worn by women who worked in the boarding houses on River Street. He walked to the sideboard and poured brandy without asking. The crystal decanter had belonged to Elizabeth's grandfather. James drank from it like it was already his. "Your father is asking for us," James said. He did not look at her. "Dr. Pemberton says we should come now, before he deteriorates further." Elizabeth stood slowly. "How is he?" "Dying." James finished the brandy and poured another. "The pneumonia has settled deep in his lungs. His heart is failing. Pemberton says it is only a matter of time." "How much time?" James finally looked at her. His expression was flat, cold. "Does it matter? He will be dead by week's end. The will is already prepared. Everything passes to me. You get your dowry when we marry in December. That is how this works, Elizabeth. That has always been how this works." Elizabeth walked toward the door. As she passed him, James caught her arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "When this is done," he said quietly, "you will remember your place. You will be my wife. You will smile when I tell you to smile. You will look the other way when I do things you do not approve of, and you will never ever question how I run this family. Do you understand me?" Elizabeth looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked at his face. Her voice was perfectly calm. "Let go of me, James." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. He was not used to her speaking to him like that. He released her arm. Elizabeth walked past him without another word. The hallway upstairs was dim and smelled like rot. Dr. Pemberton stood outside her father's bedroom door, wiping his hands on a cloth that was stained with something dark. He was 60 years old, with white whiskers and exhausted eyes. "Miss McAllister," he said quietly, "your father is very weak. His mind wanders. Try not to upset him." Elizabeth nodded. Dr. Pemberton opened the door. The bedroom was large and filled with furniture that suddenly looked useless. Her father lay in the center of a massive four-poster bed surrounded by pillows that did nothing to help him breathe. His skin had gone gray. His lips were blue. Each breath rattled in his chest like stones shaking in a tin can. Elizabeth walked to one side of the bed. James stood on the other. Her father's eyes were half closed. When Elizabeth touched his hand, his fingers moved weakly. "Elizabeth?" His voice was a whisper. "You came." "I am here, Father." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "Listen to me. James will take care of everything. You will be provided for. You will marry him as we arranged. You will give him sons. You will preserve what 3 generations have built. Do you understand? This is your duty." Elizabeth leaned closer. "Yes, Father, I understand my duty." "Good." His breathing became more labored. "Everything I have done has been to protect this family. Every decision, every sacrifice. You will understand someday. When you have children of your own, you will understand why some things matter more than what we want." Elizabeth straightened. She looked down at the man who had raised her, who had taught her to read and manage accounts, who had held her when her mother died, who had paid $500 to make the only man Elizabeth ever loved disappear from her life because that love threatened the orderly transfer of property and power. "I already understand, Father," she said. "You taught me exactly what matters in this family." He seemed satisfied with that. His eyes closed. His breathing became even worse. Dr. Pemberton stepped forward and gestured for them to leave. In the hallway, James touched her shoulder. "That was well done. He can die in peace now, knowing his affairs are in order." Elizabeth turned to face him. "When did you plan to tell me about Rebecca?" James went very still. "What?" "Rebecca Hammond, the woman you keep in rooms on Broughton Street, the woman who gave birth to your son 4 months ago. When exactly were you planning to mention that I would be raising your bastard alongside whatever legitimate children we have?" The color drained from James's face. Then it came back as anger. His hand shot out and grabbed her throat. Not hard enough to choke her, just hard enough to make his point. He pushed her back against the wall. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. His face was inches from hers. "What I do outside this house is my business, not yours. Your job is to be my wife, to manage this household, to give me legitimate heirs. If you ever bring up Rebecca or the boy again, I will make your life very unpleasant. Do you understand me?" Elizabeth looked him in the eyes. Her voice came out steady despite the hand on her throat. "Let go of me." James held her there for another moment. Then he released her and stepped back. "We marry on December 8th. You will smile and play the devoted bride. And you will never mention this again." He turned and walked down the hallway. Elizabeth stood against the wall with her hand on her throat where his fingers had been. Something inside her went cold and quiet. That night, Elizabeth sat in her room with the door locked and a candle burning on her desk. She took out a sheet of paper and a pen. She sat there for 10 minutes without moving. Then she wrote 3 lines. "They think I have no choices. They think I will do what I am told. They are wrong." She stared at those words for a long time. Then she added one more line. I am going to kill all of them." She folded the paper and placed it in the bottom of her jewelry box under the pearls her mother had worn on her wedding day. Then she walked to the door, opened it quietly, and made her way through the dark house to the greenhouse at the edge of the gardens. The greenhouse had been locked since her mother died 4 years ago. Elizabeth had the key. Inside, the air was thick and stale and smelled like death and forgotten growth. She lit a lantern and held it high. Most of the plants her mother had cultivated were dead now. Dried leaves covered the raised beds. Empty pots lined the shelves. But in the far corner, protected by glass cases, 3 plants still lived. Elizabeth walked to the cases and opened the first one. Inside grew belladonna, deadly nightshade, beautiful purple flowers on green stems. Her mother had grown it for making eye drops that dilated the pupils. Elizabeth knew from reading her mother's botanical journals that the berries contained atropine. A small amount caused hallucinations and confusion. A larger amount stopped the heart. The second case contained foxglove, tall stalks of purple bell-shaped flowers. The leaves had digitalis in them. Used correctly, it strengthened a failing heart. Used incorrectly, it caused vomiting, convulsions, and death. The third case held something her mother had acquired from a botanist in Charleston who specialized in rare poisons. A plant with tiny white flowers and delicate fern-like leaves. Her mother's journal entry had been brief. Aconitum napellus, monkshood, all parts extremely toxic. Causes rapid paralysis, respiratory collapse, death within hours. Do not touch with bare skin. A single drop on an open wound is fatal. Elizabeth opened the cabinet where her mother had kept her reference books. She removed 3 volumes and spread them on the workbench. The first was a medical text on toxicology. The second was her mother's personal journal with detailed notes on poison extraction. The third was a slim book that Dr. Nathaniel Wainwright had given her 8 months ago before her father paid him to leave Savannah. A treatise on detecting poisons in corpse tissue. She opened her mother's journal to the page about monkshood and began to read. The extraction process was detailed and dangerous. Harvest the roots and leaves, dry them carefully, crush them to powder, steep in grain alcohol for 6 hours. Filter through cloth. What remained was a clear liquid that looked like water and smelled like almost nothing. 6 drops would kill a healthy man within 12 hours. 10 drops would kill him in 4 hours. 15 drops would cause violent convulsions, followed by paralysis, followed by death in less than 2 hours. Elizabeth read the instructions 3 times. Then she put on the thick leather gloves her mother had used for handling dangerous plants. She opened the case containing the monkshood and carefully clipped 2 small branches. She wrapped them in cloth and placed them in a basket. She spent the next hour following the extraction process exactly as her mother's journal described, crushing the leaves and roots, mixing them with the grain alcohol she had taken from the locked cabinet in the study, waiting for the liquid to take on the faint greenish tint that meant the alkaloid was present. When it was done, she had perhaps 20 drops of clear poison in a small glass vial. She held it up to the lantern light. It looked harmless, like water. She thought about her father upstairs dying slowly. She thought about James's hand on her throat. She thought about Dr. Wainwright taking $500 to remove himself from her life. Her hand holding the vial did not shake, not even a little. She cleaned everything, put the books back, locked the greenhouse, walked through the dark gardens back to the house. In the kitchen, she prepared her father's morning tray exactly as the servants would expect. Weak tea, dry toast, the morning dose of laudanum for his pain. In her room, she poured 10 drops of the monkshood poison into the brown bottle of laudanum. The poison disappeared without a trace. At 8 in the morning, Elizabeth brought the tray to her father's room. Dr. Pemberton was there, checking her father's pulse. He looked up when she entered. "He is somewhat more alert this morning," the doctor said. "It sometimes happens near the end, the body making one last effort." "Should I give him his medicine?" "Yes, the laudanum will ease the pain in his chest. He is suffering, though he tries not to show it." Elizabeth mixed the laudanum with water, as she had been taught. 10 drops of medicine, 10 drops of poison. She held the glass to her father's lips. He drank it in small sips. His eyes met hers over the rim of the glass. For just a moment, Elizabeth thought he knew. Then he finished drinking, and his eyes closed. "Thank you, daughter," he whispered. "You were always a good girl." Elizabeth set down the glass. She kissed his forehead. His skin was cold and damp with sweat. "Rest now, Father." She left the room. She went downstairs and ate breakfast with Thomas and James. She smiled when expected. She answered questions about wedding preparations. She was calm, composed, perfect. At 10:30, a servant came running into the dining room. Her father was having convulsions. Elizabeth followed James and Thomas upstairs. Dr. Pemberton was already in the room. What Elizabeth saw when she walked through that door would stay with her for the rest of her life. Her father's body was arched off the bed, his back bent like a bow. His mouth was locked open in a silent scream. Foam gathered thick and white at the corners of his lips. His eyes were wide open and completely bloodshot. The whites had gone red. Blood vessels had burst in his face, creating a pattern of purple lines across his cheeks and forehead. His arms were rigid. His fingers were curled into claws that dug into the sheets hard enough to tear the fabric. Every muscle in his body was contracting at once. The tendons in his neck stood out like ropes. His jaw was clenched so tight that 2 of his teeth cracked with sounds like breaking sticks. Dr. Pemberton was trying to hold him down. "Help me! He is seizing! I need to get morphine into him!" James grabbed one arm. Thomas grabbed the other. Elizabeth stood frozen in the doorway, watching. Her father's eyes found hers. His mouth worked. He was trying to say something. No sound came out except a wet, gurgling noise, but his eyes said everything. They said he knew. They said he understood exactly what was happening to him. They said, "Daughter, how could you?" Then his body went rigid one final time. His back arched even higher. Something in his spine made a cracking sound. His eyes stayed open, but the life went out of them like a candle being snuffed. The whole thing lasted 4 minutes. Dr. Pemberton checked for a pulse. Then he checked again. Then he stepped back and shook his head. "He is gone. Heart failure brought on by the pneumonia. His system simply could not take the strain. I am very sorry for your loss." James let go of his father's arm. Thomas did the same. Both of them looked shaken. Elizabeth walked slowly into the room. She looked down at her father's body. His eyes were still open, still staring. His mouth was still locked in that silent scream. "Close his eyes," she said quietly. "Please, he should not look like that." Dr. Pemberton gently closed her father's eyes. Then he pulled the sheet up over the body. "I will prepare the death certificate," he said. "Cause of death will be listed as pneumonia complicated by heart failure. No autopsy will be necessary. The family may make whatever funeral arrangements they see fit." He left the room. Thomas followed him, muttering something about needing air. James stayed for a moment longer. "Well," he said, "it is done. I am head of this family now." He looked at Elizabeth. "And you are going to be my wife, whether you like it or not." He walked out. Elizabeth stood alone beside the bed where her father's body lay under the white sheet. She looked at the medicine glass on the side table, still half full of water and laudanum and poison. She picked it up, walked to the window, and poured it out onto the roses below. Then she set down the glass and walked out of the room without looking back. That night, Elizabeth sat at her desk and opened a new ledger book she had purchased in town the week before. On the first page, she wrote a title in careful script, "The Book of Corrections." Under that, she wrote the first entry. October 15th, 1842. Jonathan McAllister. Father. Crime. Sold his daughter like property and destroyed her chance at happiness to preserve family wealth. Sentence. Death by monkshood poisoning. Execution carried out at 8:15 this morning. Time of death, 10:34. Symptoms. Violent convulsions, paralysis, respiratory collapse, heart failure. Duration. 4 minutes. He knew at the end. His eyes said so. I feel nothing. Remaining targets. 7. She closed the book, locked it in the bottom drawer of her desk, and went to sleep with her hands folded on top of the blanket and her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling until dawn broke over Savannah and the first day of her new life began. 3 weeks after murdering her father, Elizabeth stood in the greenhouse crushing monkshood roots into powder that could stop a human heart in minutes. Her hands did not shake. They had not shaken since the morning she watched her father die convulsing in his bed. What surprised her was not that she had become a killer. What surprised her was how natural it felt. November 7th, 1842. The wedding was scheduled for December 8th. Elizabeth had exactly 31 days to perfect the poison that would make her a widow before she ever became a wife. She worked by lamplight. On the workbench in front of her sat 3 glass vials. The first contained concentrated belladonna extract, clear liquid that looked like water and caused hallucinations, confusion, and cardiac arrhythmia. The second held digitalis from foxglove, also clear, also deadly. It stressed the heart until it simply stopped trying. The third vial was empty, waiting. Elizabeth measured 3 drops of belladonna into the empty vial, then 2 drops of digitalis. Then she picked up the mortar where she had been grinding monkshood roots into powder finer than flour. She mixed the powder with grain alcohol and let it steep while she read her mother's journal entry about alkaloid extraction times. After 6 minutes, she filtered the monkshood liquid through cheesecloth. 5 drops of the clear poison went into the empty vial with the belladonna and digitalis. She sealed the vial and held it up to the lamplight. 10 drops total. 3 different poisons combined in one mixture. She had spent 2 weeks perfecting the ratios, testing them on rats from the barn, watching what happened when she got the proportions wrong and when she got them right. This batch was right. She could tell by the way the liquids mixed without clouding, by the complete absence of smell, by the fact that it looked exactly like water. She had named it in her ledger, the Trinity. 3 deaths in one. Belladonna to confuse, digitalis to stress, monkshood to stop everything forever. Now she needed to test it one more time before she used it on James. Elizabeth walked to the corner of the greenhouse where she kept the rats in a wooden cage. She reached in and grabbed one, a large male, fat and healthy. She carried it back to the workbench and placed it in a small glass container she had prepared. Inside the container was a cotton ball soaked in water. She used a thin glass rod to apply 3 drops of the Trinity to the cotton ball. Then she sealed the container and set her pocket watch on the workbench. The rat sniffed the cotton ball, licked it once, then sat back on its haunches and began to clean its whiskers. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. At minute 3, the rat's movements became jerky, uncoordinated. It tried to walk and fell over sideways. At minute 4, the seizure started. The rat's body went rigid. Its legs shot out straight and stiff. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. Then the convulsions began, violent, rhythmic. The rat's body arched and twisted. Its tail whipped back and forth. Foam bubbled from its nose and mouth, white at first, then pink, then red, as blood vessels burst in its throat. Elizabeth watched without blinking. She made notes: time, symptoms, progression. At minute 6, blood began leaking from the rat's ears. Its eyes had gone bloodshot, the whites completely red. The convulsions continued, but weaker now. The rat's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Each breath made a wet, rattling sound. At minute 8, the rat's back arched one final time, so far backward that Elizabeth heard vertebrae crack. The rat's body went completely rigid, frozen in that impossible position. Then it collapsed, went limp, stopped breathing. Elizabeth checked her pocket watch. 8 minutes, 12 seconds from first exposure to death. She made a note: reduced dosage from previous test, faster death, less suffering, better for human application. She disposed of the rat's body in the burn pile behind the greenhouse. Then she cleaned the glass container thoroughly, washed her hands 3 times with lye soap, returned to the workbench. She was preparing to mix another batch of the Trinity when her hand slipped. The vial tilted. 1 drop of the poison fell, hit the edge of the workbench, splashed. A tiny droplet landed on Elizabeth's wrist, just below where her glove ended, on bare skin. She froze, stared at that drop of liquid on her wrist, clear as water, deadly as anything on earth. Her mother's journal had been very specific. Contact with skin can be fatal, even a small amount. If it enters through an open wound, death is almost certain. Elizabeth grabbed a cloth and wiped the poison off her wrist, hard, scrubbing until her skin was red and raw. She looked at her wrist carefully. No cuts, no abrasions. The skin was intact. The poison had not entered her bloodstream, but it could have. So easily. 1 small cut she had not noticed, 1 tiny break in the skin, and she would have died right here in the greenhouse with her own poison in her veins. Her hands were shaking now, the first time they had shaken since her father died. She set down the cloth and gripped the edge of the workbench, forced herself to breathe slowly, in through her nose, out through her mouth, again, until the shaking stopped. She looked at the vials of poison on the workbench, at the rat cage in the corner, at her mother's journals filled with detailed instructions for creating death. This was what she had become. A woman who mixed poisons in a greenhouse at night and tested them on rats and did not feel anything except satisfaction when they died exactly as planned. For one moment, Elizabeth thought about stopping, about pouring all the poison down the drain and walking away, about becoming someone other than a murderer. Then she remembered James's hand on her throat, the way he had looked at her when he said she would smile when he told her to smile, the way her father had left her nothing except the privilege of being property. The moment passed. Elizabeth picked up another vial and began mixing a fresh batch of the Trinity. Her hands were steady again, completely steady. She worked for another hour. By the time she finished, she had 4 vials of the Trinity, each one containing exactly 10 drops, enough to kill a man in less than 10 minutes. She labeled them carefully, stored 3 in the hidden compartment under the workbench, put 1 in her pocket. The greenhouse door opened. Elizabeth's hand went instinctively to the vial in her pocket. She turned around. Thomas stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. Her younger brother was 19 years old with dark hair and soft features that made him look younger than he was. He was wearing evening clothes. He had been out with friends. He smelled like whiskey and cigar smoke. "Elizabeth, what are you doing out here so late?" Elizabeth forced herself to relax. "Going through Mother's botanical work. I find it calming." Thomas stepped into the greenhouse. His eyes went to the workbench, to the books, to the open case where the monk's hood grew. His expression changed. "You are working with the poison plants." "I am studying them. There is a difference." "Why?" "Because Mother spent 20 years cultivating these specimens. Someone should understand what she accomplished." Thomas walked closer. He picked up one of her mother's journals and flipped through it, stopped on a page about extraction methods. "These are not botanical notes, Elizabeth. These are instructions for creating poison." He looked at her. "What are you planning to do?" Elizabeth met his eyes. "I am planning to survive, that is all." "By poisoning people?" "By protecting myself from people who mean me harm." Thomas set down the journal. "Father has been dead for 3 weeks. Are you saying someone harmed you? Who?" "James. Every single day, every conversation, every threat, every reminder that I am his property, and he can do whatever he wants with me once we marry." "James is arrogant. I know that, but he would not hurt you." Elizabeth walked to the workbench and picked up the journal Thomas had been looking at. She opened it to a page near the back where her mother had written about monk's hood toxicity. "Do you know what this plant does? It causes paralysis. The victim is completely conscious. They can see and hear everything, but they cannot move, cannot speak, cannot even breathe on their own. They die slowly while their mind stays perfectly aware." That is what James is offering me, Thomas. A life where I am conscious but paralyzed, where I watch my existence happen to me but have no power to change it. She closed the journal. "I would rather be dead, and if I cannot be dead, then James will be instead." Thomas stared at her. "You are planning to kill him?" "Yes." "Did you kill Father?" Elizabeth did not answer. She just looked at him. Thomas took a step backward. His face had gone pale. "Oh, God, you did? You actually murdered Father?" "Father was dying anyway. I simply helped him along." "That is insane, Elizabeth. That is murder. You will hang if anyone finds out." "No one will find out, because you are not going to tell anyone." "I should tell everyone. I should go to the authorities right now." Elizabeth's hand went to the vial in her pocket. "If you try to leave this greenhouse, I will kill you before you reach the door. I have poison in my pocket right now. I can have it in your drink tonight. You will die in your sleep. Dr. Pemberton will say your heart gave out. Young men die that way sometimes. Tragic, unexpected. No one will suspect anything except bad luck." Thomas's hand froze on the door handle. "You would kill your own brother." "I would kill anyone who threatens what I am trying to accomplish. You, James, Dr. Pemberton, anyone. I do not want to, but I will if I must." Thomas stood there for a long moment, not moving, barely breathing. Elizabeth watched the thoughts move across his face. Fear, horror, calculation. She could see the exact moment when he stopped thinking about right and wrong and started thinking about survival. "If I say nothing," he said slowly, "what happens to me?" "You live." "And if I help you?" Elizabeth had not expected that. Help me how? Be your witness that you are innocent. Your character reference, the loyal brother who says his sister could never do such terrible things. Whatever you need me to be to keep suspicion away from you. Why would you do that? Thomas turned to face her fully. His expression had changed, gone cold. Because if you are going to murder everyone who stands between you and the family fortune, I want half of it when you are done. Elizabeth studied him, her weak younger brother who still played cards and spent money on clothes. She had expected him to collapse, to beg, to run. Instead, he was negotiating. What exactly are you proposing? You get your revenge, you get your freedom, and when it is all finished and you own everything, I get half the estate, half the plantation, half the business interests, half the money. That is the price for my cooperation. What if I refuse? Then I walk out of here right now and I tell James everything. You will kill me. Maybe, but James will know before I die. And once he knows, you will never get close enough to poison him. You will either hang for murder or spend the rest of your life trapped in exactly the situation you are trying to escape. Elizabeth walked toward him, stopped close enough to see the fear in his eyes that he was trying very hard to hide. You understand what you are agreeing to? You will be complicit in multiple murders. If I am caught, you hang beside me. I understand. You will have to watch me kill people. James, Aunt Margaret, Uncle Henry, others. You will have to smile and act grief-stricken and never once let anyone suspect that you know exactly what is happening. How many others? Elizabeth walked back to the workbench. She opened the drawer and took out her ledger, the Book of Corrections. She opened it to the page where she had written a list of names, 7 more after James, possibly 8 depending on how things develop. Thomas moved closer despite himself. He looked at the list. His finger stopped on one name. Sarah, Rebecca Hammond's daughter? Elizabeth, she is 6 years old. She is James's bastard. If he dies without legitimate heirs, she inherits, which means I get nothing. She is a child. She is an obstacle. Thomas looked at his sister like he had never seen her before. You are going to murder a 6-year-old girl. Only if she becomes a problem. If James dies before we have children, Sarah inherits his portion of the estate. I cannot allow that. This is monstrous. This is practical. Do you want half the estate or not? Thomas stood there staring at the list of names, at the dates beside each one, at the detailed notes about methods and timing. Finally, he looked up at Elizabeth. When do we start? James dies on November 22nd, 2 weeks from now. You need to be prepared to act shocked and grief-stricken when it happens. How will he die? Heart failure at breakfast, fast, clean. Dr. Pemberton will sign the death certificate without question. And the others? Slower, more careful. If too many people die quickly, patterns emerge. This needs to take time, probably 2 years, maybe 3. Thomas held out his hand. Partners? Elizabeth looked at his hand, then she took it. His grip was cold and clammy. Partners? Thomas released her hand and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped. Elizabeth, do you feel guilty at all? Even a little? No, she said. I do not feel guilty at all, not even a little. Thomas nodded slowly. Then he walked out into the November night. Elizabeth stood alone in the greenhouse for a long time. Then she added a note in her ledger next to Thomas's name. Accomplice, bought with promise of inheritance. Reliable as long as he believes I will honor the agreement. She closed the ledger. locked it in the hidden compartment, cleaned the workbench, put away the vials. By the time she left the greenhouse, there was no evidence she had been doing anything except looking at her mother's old plants. She walked through the dark gardens back toward the house. The windows were lit. Inside, she could hear music and laughter. James was entertaining guests again, drinking expensive wine and smoking cigars and telling jokes while Elizabeth planned his death in the greenhouse. She entered through the back door, went directly to her room, locked the door behind her, changed out of her work dress, washed her hands thoroughly with lye soap. Then she sat at her desk and took out paper and pen. For 10 minutes she sat there staring at the blank page. Then she began to write. Dear Dr. Wainwright, I hope this letter finds you well wherever you have gone. I am writing to inform you that my father passed away 3 weeks ago. The funeral was well attended, very respectable. I am to be married next month to my cousin James, as father wished. I expect it will be a lovely ceremony. I hope you are content with the choice you made. I hope $500 was sufficient compensation for abandoning someone who loved you. I hope you sleep well at night, knowing that your decision helped ensure I would spend the rest of my life trapped in a marriage I never wanted. Actually, that is a lie. I do not hope you sleep well. I hope you lie awake wondering if you made the right choice. I hope the guilt eats at you. I hope you eventually understand that you could have saved me and you chose not to. Sincerely, Elizabeth Ann McAllister. She read the letter twice, then she folded it carefully, addressed an envelope, placed a stamp on it, put it in her reticule to mail in the morning. Let him know. Let him carry that weight wherever he had run to. A knock at her door made her jump. Hard. Violent enough that her chair scraped against the floor. Elizabeth, open this door. Now. James, drunk by the sound of him. Elizabeth's hand went to her pocket where the vial of Trinity poison rested. Then she stood and unlocked the door. James pushed it open hard enough that it hit the wall. He was drunk, very drunk. His cravat was undone. His shirt was partially unbuttoned. His eyes were unfocused, and his movements were clumsy. He smelled like whiskey and sweat. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "My guests were asking about you. I made excuses, said you were unwell, but I know you were not in this room. So where were you?" "Walking in the garden. I needed air." Liar. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "You were in that greenhouse again. That is where you spend every night now. What are you doing out there?" "Nothing that concerns you." James grabbed her arm, hard. His fingers dug into the same spot he had bruised 3 weeks ago. "Everything you do concerns me. You are going to be my wife. That means I own you, your time, your thoughts, your body. Everything." Elizabeth tried to pull her arm free. His grip tightened. "Let go of me, James." "No, not until you understand something." He pulled her closer, pushed her back against the wall. His other hand went to her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there, heavy and hot. "After we marry, you will do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. You will smile. You will be grateful. You will never question me. And if you refuse?" His hand moved from her throat to her chest, squeezed hard enough to make her gasp. "I will make you regret it. Do you understand?" Elizabeth's hand found the letter opener on her desk. She gripped it tight. If he went any further, she would drive it into his throat. Scream self-defense. Make it work. But James stepped back, smiled, a cold, ugly expression. "Good girl. You are learning. Just remember, Elizabeth, in 1 month You are mine, completely mine. I can do whatever I want with you, and there is nothing you can do to stop me." He turned and walked out, left the door open. Elizabeth stood against the wall with the letter opener gripped so hard in her hand that her knuckles were white and her fingers had gone numb. She walked to the door, closed it, locked it, wedged a chair under the handle. Then she sat on the floor with her back against the door and her arms wrapped around her knees. For the first time since her father died, Elizabeth felt afraid, really afraid, because James was right. In 1 month, she would be his wife, legally his property, and there was nothing she could do to stop him except kill him first. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against the floor and forced herself to breathe. In through her nose, out through her mouth, slow, steady, until the shaking stopped and the fear transformed into something colder. Certainty. James was going to die, not in 1 month. Sooner. She could not wait until November 22nd. That was too long, too dangerous. James was becoming more aggressive, more violent. If she waited, he might hurt her badly enough that she could not function, could not plan, could not execute what needed to be done. Elizabeth stood, moved the chair away from the door, walked to her desk, opened her ledger to the page with James's name on it. She crossed out November 22nd and wrote a new date, November 12th, 5 days from now. Early enough that the connection between his violence tonight and his death would not be obvious. Late enough that she could prepare everything properly. Under the date, she wrote detailed plans. Morning coffee, 10 drops of Trinity, cardiac arrest within 10 minutes. Dr. Pemberton, death certificate, grief-stricken bride, perfect execution. She wrote for an hour. When she finished, the plan was flawless. All she had to do was wait 5 days and execute it exactly as written. Elizabeth closed the ledger, locked it away. Then she took the vial of Trinity from her pocket and held it up to the candlelight. Clear as water, deadly as sin. In 5 days, this would end James McAllister's life, and Elizabeth would be free. She set down the vial carefully, blew out the candle, lay in bed with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling while moonlight filtered through the curtains and cast shadows that looked like prison bars across her blankets. 5 more days. Then James would be dead. Then she could breathe again. Then she could continue with the rest of her list without the constant fear of being violated by a man who believed he owned her. 5 more days. Elizabeth closed her eyes and dreamed of poison and freedom and a future where she answered to no one except herself. November 12th, 1842. The morning Elizabeth killed James McAllister started like every other morning at the McAllister estate. Servants lit fires in the fireplaces. Cooks prepared breakfast. The sun rose over cotton fields. And Elizabeth stood in her bedroom holding a small glass vial filled with clear liquid that would stop a human heart in less than 10 minutes. She had not slept. Every detail of the plan was perfect. She had rehearsed every word, every gesture, every tear. Now it was time to execute. Elizabeth tucked the vial into her pocket and walked downstairs. James and Thomas were already seated in the dining room. James looked terrible. Bloodshot eyes, gray skin. He reeked of whiskey from the night before. Good. That would help explain the heart attack. "Good morning," Elizabeth said quietly. James grunted. Thomas glanced at her and then quickly looked away. He knew what was about to happen. She had told him yesterday. The servants brought breakfast, eggs, toast, ham, fresh coffee. Elizabeth poured a cup for herself. Then she picked up the pot and walked to James. Would you like coffee? Yes? James did not look up from his newspaper. Elizabeth poured coffee into his cup until it nearly reached the rim. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out the vial, uncorked it. In one smooth motion that took less than 2 seconds, she tipped 10 drops of the Trinity into the coffee. The poison disappeared without a trace. Elizabeth put the empty vial back in her pocket, returned to her seat, started eating eggs that tasted like nothing because her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. James lifted his cup, drank, set it down, went back to his newspaper. Elizabeth counted silently. According to her tests, symptoms would begin in 3 to 4 minutes. Death in 6 to 10. 1 minute passed. James took another drink, turned the page. 2 minutes. James finished his coffee, started eating his eggs. His movements were normal. 3 minutes. James dropped his fork. It clattered against his plate. His hand went to his chest. Heartburn. He drank his water. 4 minutes. James's hand pressed hard against his chest. His face twisted. Something is wrong. My chest? It hurts. Thomas looked up. James, are you all right? I do not know. I feel strange. Elizabeth stood. Should I call for Dr. Pemberton? No, just give me a moment. James tried to stand, made it halfway out of his chair. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed back down. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Elizabeth, something is very wrong. 5 minutes. James's face went white, then gray. Sweat broke out on his forehead. His hands clutched at his chest. His eyes were wide with terror. He tried to stand again. This time he fell, hit the floor hard. His body convulsed. Once, twice. James! Thomas jumped up and ran to him, dropped to his knees beside him. What is happening? James, can you hear me? James's mouth opened. No sound came out except a wet, choking noise. His back arched off the floor. Every muscle went rigid. His hands curled into claws. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Elizabeth stood frozen. This was supposed to look natural, but James was seizing. This looked like poison. 6 minutes. Foam bubbled from James's mouth. White, then pink. Blood vessels bursting in his throat. His body convulsed violently. His head slammed against the floor. Crack. Blood pooled underneath. Do something! Thomas screamed. Help him! Elizabeth finally moved. She ran to the door, threw it open. Help! Someone help! Mr. James is dying. 3 servants burst in, stopped dead, stared. Get Dr. Pemberton! Elizabeth shouted. Now! Run! 1 servant ran. The others stood frozen. Elizabeth pushed past them and dropped to her knees beside James. His eyes found hers. For one terrible moment, he was completely lucid. His lips moved. No sound. But she could read what he was saying. You. He knew. He knew she had poisoned him, and there was nothing he could do about it. 7 minutes. James's body arched one final time, his spine bent backward. Elizabeth heard vertebrae crack like breaking sticks. His mouth locked open in a silent scream. Blood ran from his nose, from his ears, from the corners of his eyes. Then he went still. His eyes stayed open, staring, accusing. Elizabeth put her fingers on his neck. No pulse. She sat back, looked at Thomas. He is dead? Thomas stared at her, his face white, hands shaking. That was not a heart attack. That was exactly a heart attack. Elizabeth stood. She was covered in James's blood. His heart failed. That is what we will tell Dr. Pemberton. That is what we will tell everyone. Do you understand? Thomas nodded slowly. Dr. Pemberton arrived 15 minutes later. By then, Elizabeth had cleaned James's face, positioned his body, covered the blood with a rug. She had changed her dress and washed her hands and could cry on command. When the doctor walked in, Elizabeth grabbed his hands. "Dr. Pemberton, thank God. It was horrible. He just collapsed. We tried to help, but there was nothing we could do." Dr. Pemberton knelt beside James, checked for pulse, breathing, found none. He opened James's eyes, looked carefully, frowned. "How long ago?" "Perhaps 20 minutes. Time moved strangely." "And he simply collapsed?" "He said his chest hurt. He tried to stand. Then he fell and he was convulsing. It happened so fast." Dr. Pemberton opened James's mouth, saw the blood, the burst vessels. His frown deepened. "This is unusual, the hemorrhaging, the violence of the attack. It suggests massive cardiac failure, but James was young, healthy. Such things are rare." Elizabeth's heart stopped. "But not impossible?" "I have heard of young men dying suddenly," Thomas said from the doorway. His voice was steady now. "Athletes, soldiers, it happens." Dr. Pemberton looked at Thomas, then Elizabeth, then back at James. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood and wiped his hands. "Yes, it does happen. The heart is mysterious. Sometimes it simply fails." He paused, looked directly at Elizabeth. "You were to be married next month, were you not?" "Yes." "Did James have any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm?" The room went cold. Elizabeth forced herself to meet the doctor's eyes. "Enemies? No. Everyone loved James. He was kind, generous. This is just terrible luck." Dr. Pemberton held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded. "I will prepare a death certificate. Cause of death, acute cardiac arrest. My condolences." "Thank you, Doctor." After he left, Elizabeth stood alone with James's body. She felt nothing except cold satisfaction. He had died badly, but he had died. That was what mattered. She took out her ledger and wrote, November 12th, 1842, James Thaddeus McAllister, dead. Time, 7 minutes. Symptoms more violent than expected. Doctor suspicious but manageable. Remaining targets, 7. The funeral was held 3 days later. Half of Savannah attended. Elizabeth wore black and cried at appropriate moments. Everyone said it was tragic. Such a young man. His poor cousin who lost her fiancé so suddenly. At the reception after the burial, Mrs. Whitmore took Elizabeth's hand. She was 70 years old and had known the McAllister family for decades. "You poor dear," she said. "First your father, now your fiancé, both within a month." "Yes," Elizabeth lowered her eyes. "It has been very difficult. Some might say there is a curse on this family." Elizabeth's blood went cold. She looked up slowly. "A curse?" "Oh, just old superstition, child. Pay me no mind." But Mrs. Whitmore's eyes were sharp, calculating. Still, 2 healthy men, both dead of heart failure, within weeks of each other, one might wonder. Wonder what? "Nothing, dear, nothing at all." Mrs. Whitmore patted her hand. But as she walked away, Elizabeth saw her lean close to Mrs. Patterson and whisper something. Both women glanced back at Elizabeth. Then they looked away quickly. Elizabeth's hands started shaking. She forced them still, smiled, accepted more condolences. But inside her chest, fear was growing like ice. People were noticing. People were talking. She needed to slow down, be more careful. After the reception, the will was read. James had left everything to Elizabeth, the plantation, the business interests, all of it. She was now one of the wealthiest women in Georgia. Thomas pulled her aside after the lawyer left. "We need to talk." They went to the study. Thomas locked the door. His face was pale. Dr. Pemberton came to see me yesterday." Elizabeth's heart stopped. "What did he say?" "He asked if there was any history of heart disease in our family." "What did you tell him?" "I said no. He looked at me strangely, said it was unusual for two healthy men to die of cardiac failure within a month." Thomas stepped closer. "Elizabeth, he suspects something." "Did he say that?" "He did not have to. I could see it in his eyes. He thinks something is wrong." Elizabeth walked to the window, looked out at the gardens, at the greenhouse where she mixed poisons in the dark. What else did he say? He asked about Father's symptoms before he died, about whether he had taken any medicines, about whether anyone had access to his food or drink. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Elizabeth, he is asking about poison." "And what did you say?" "I said Father had pneumonia, that the servants prepared all his food, that dozens of people had access. I gave him nothing specific." "Good." "Good? Elizabeth, he suspects? We need to stop now, before someone figures this out." Elizabeth turned from the window. "We stop when the list is finished, not before." "This is madness. You're going to get us both hanged." "I am going to be careful. That is the difference." She walked to her desk, opened her ledger. "The next death needs to look completely natural. No violence, no suspicion. I will wait 3 months. Let things settle. Then Aunt Margaret will die quietly, in her sleep. And if Pemberton keeps investigating, then I will deal with him too." Thomas stared at her. "You would kill a doctor? A respected member of the community?" "I would kill anyone who threatens what I am building. You know that by now." Thomas turned and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. What if I changed my mind? What if I went to him and told him everything? Elizabeth's hand went to the drawer where she kept a vial of Trinity. "Then I would poison you tonight, and I would inherit your half as your only living relative. Is that what you want? No? Then do your job. Be my character witness. That is all I need from you." Thomas left without another word. Elizabeth sat alone in the study for a long time. Then she opened her ledger and began planning Aunt Margaret's death. This time it would be perfect. Slow, gentle, natural. No one would suspect a thing. February 1843, 3 months after James's funeral. Aunt Margaret lived in a small house on the edge of the estate. She was 74 years old with a weak heart and failing memory. Elizabeth visited her every week, brought tea, sat with her, talked about family. No one thought it was strange when Elizabeth started visiting more often. On February 14th, Elizabeth arrived at Margaret's house with a basket of medicines. "The doctor sent these for you, Aunt, for your heart." Margaret squinted at the bottles. "I do not remember Dr. Pemberton mentioning new medicines." "He said your condition has worsened. These will help you sleep better, ease the pain in your chest." Margaret took the bottles. "You are such a good girl, Elizabeth, taking care of your old aunt." "It is my pleasure." That night, Margaret took the medicine Elizabeth had given her. It was digitalis, mixed with a small amount of laudanum, just enough to make her sleep deeply, not enough to kill her, not yet. Elizabeth visited every day for 2 weeks. Each time she adjusted Margaret's dosage, a little more digitalis, a little less laudanum, slowly stressing the heart, wearing it down. On March 1st, Margaret's maid found her dead in her bed. She had died peacefully in her sleep. No violence, no blood, no signs of struggle. Dr. Pemberton was called. He examined the body, checked the medicines on the bedside table, talked to the maid. Then he signed the death certificate. Cause of death: heart failure due to advanced age. At Margaret's funeral, Dr. Pemberton pulled Thomas aside. Elizabeth watched from across the church, saw the doctor's serious expression, saw Thomas go pale. Her hand went to her pocket where she always carried a vial now. If Pemberton accused her, she would have to act fast, poison him before he could tell anyone. But Thomas just nodded at whatever the doctor was saying. Then he walked back to Elizabeth. "What did he want?" she whispered. "He said he was sorry for our loss, that we have had terrible luck with family deaths." Thomas's voice was shaking. Then he asked if Margaret had been taking any unusual medicines. "What did you say?" "I said only what Pemberton prescribed. He asked who delivered them. I said the pharmacy in town." "And?" "He looked at me for a very long time. Then he said he hoped our family's bad luck would end soon." Thomas grabbed Elizabeth's arm. "He knows. He does not have proof, but he knows something is wrong." Elizabeth smiled and nodded at someone across the church, kept her voice low. "Then we will be more careful with the next one." "There cannot be a next one, not yet. Too many deaths too close together. People will notice the pattern." "I know. That is why Uncle Henry will not die for another 6 months, and it will look like an accident, something no one can question." Thomas closed his eyes. "This has to stop eventually." "It will, when everyone on my list is dead and we own everything." That night, Elizabeth sat in the greenhouse mixing a new batch of poison. She was adjusting the formula again, making it slower, gentler, harder to detect. She had killed 3 people now: her father, James, Aunt Margaret, and she was just getting started. The door opened. Thomas walked in looking exhausted. "5 more names on the list," he said quietly. "How long will this take?" "A year, maybe 2, if we are patient." "And what happens when Dr. Pemberton finally finds proof?" Elizabeth looked up from her work. "He will not, because I am very good at this." "You are a monster." "No." Elizabeth went back to mixing her poison. "I am a survivor. There is a difference." Thomas stood there for another moment. Then he turned and walked out into the night. Elizabeth finished her work, sealed the vial, made notes in her journal. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the main house where lights still burned in the windows. 5 more deaths. 5 more obstacles between her and total control. She could do this. She had already proven that. Uncle Henry would be next. Then his son Robert. Then Rebecca Hammond and her daughter Sarah. Then anyone else who stood between her and the McAllister fortune. By this time next year, the bloodline would be reduced to her and Thomas, and the estate would be theirs alone. Elizabeth closed her eyes and saw James's face as he died, the way his lips had moved. He had known, and he had died anyway, because knowing was not enough. Proof was what mattered. And she had made certain there was no proof. She opened her eyes, looked at her reflection in the dark window, saw a young woman in a black morning dress with cold green eyes and blood on her hands that no amount of washing would ever remove. This was who she was now: a killer, a poisoner, a woman who ended lives as casually as other women poured tea. And she was very good at it. Elizabeth turned from the window, locked the greenhouse, walked back to the main house through gardens that smelled like roses and death. Tomorrow she would start planning Uncle Henry's accident. Tonight she would sleep well. No guilt, no regret. Just cold satisfaction that the McAllister bloodline was collapsing exactly as planned. August 1843, 9 months after James died, 6 months after Aunt Margaret. The McAllister estate had become known as the Cursed Plantation. 3 deaths in less than a year. People whispered about bad luck and divine punishment and whether the family had offended God somehow. But Elizabeth knew the truth. There was no curse, no divine intervention, just poison and planning and perfect execution. Uncle Henry was next on her list. He was 62 years old and owned a shipping company in Charleston. He had been vocal about James's death, too vocal. At the funeral, he had pulled Dr. Pemberton aside and suggested an investigation, had talked about how unusual it was for a healthy young man to die so suddenly, how perhaps someone should look more carefully at the circumstances. Dr. Pemberton had dismissed him, but Elizabeth had not forgotten. Uncle Henry was dangerous. He asked too many questions, made too many connections. He needed to die before he convinced someone to listen to him. But this death could not look like illness. Too many illnesses in one family would confirm suspicions. This death needed to look like an accident, something tragic and unavoidable that no one could question. Elizabeth had been planning it for months, and now, on a hot August morning, she was finally ready to execute. Uncle Henry was visiting the estate to discuss business with Thomas. Something about cotton contracts and shipping routes. He had arrived the night before and would be leaving this afternoon. Elizabeth had exactly 6 hours to kill him and make it look accidental. She stood in the stables at dawn while the grooms prepared horses for the morning. Uncle Henry always went riding when he visited. Every single time. He was predictable that way, which made him easy to kill. Elizabeth walked to the stall where Uncle Henry's favorite horse was kept, a large bay gelding named Thunder. She checked to make sure no one was watching. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside the pouch were crushed glass thistle seeds coated with monkshood extract. She had prepared them the night before. Each seed was sharp enough to pierce skin. Each one carried enough poison to cause serious damage. Elizabeth opened Thunder's saddle pad, the one Uncle Henry would use. She spread the coated seeds along the inside of the pad, right where they would press against the horse's back when weight was applied. Then she folded the pad carefully and put it back exactly as it had been. The glass would cut through Thunder's skin when Uncle Henry mounted. The poison would enter the bloodstream. Within minutes, the horse would panic. Buck, throw its rider. And if Uncle Henry was thrown hard enough at full gallop, the fall would kill him. If not, Elizabeth had a backup plan. She left the stable and walked back to the house. Uncle Henry was already awake, sitting in the dining room eating breakfast with Thomas. "Good morning, Elizabeth," Uncle Henry said when she entered. He was a large man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that always seemed to be calculating. "I was just telling Thomas that I plan to ride this morning. Would you like to join me?" "I would be delighted," Elizabeth said with a smile. "Let me change into riding clothes." 30 minutes later, Elizabeth and Uncle Henry rode out toward the cotton fields. Thomas had declined to join them. He had looked at Elizabeth with fear in his eyes when Uncle Henry invited her. He knew something was going to happen. He just did not know what. Thunder was a strong horse, fast, spirited. Uncle Henry sat tall in the saddle, completely unaware that beneath him dozens of tiny glass shards had already cut into the horse's back. The poison was spreading through Thunder's system, minute by minute, dose by dose. They rode for 10 minutes. Thunder's movements became erratic. The horse tossed its head, snorted, shifted nervously. "Something is wrong with Thunder," Uncle Henry said. "He is not usually this agitated." "Perhaps he sensed a snake," Elizabeth suggested, "or maybe the heat is bothering him." Thunder suddenly reared. Uncle Henry grabbed the reins, pulled hard, but Thunder reared again, higher this time, front hooves striking the air. "Whoa!" Uncle Henry shouted. "Steady! Steady!" Thunder came down hard, then immediately bucked. His back legs kicked up violently. Uncle Henry lost his seat. For one moment he hung suspended in the air. Then he fell. He hit the ground hard. His head struck a rock. The sound was like breaking pottery, wet and final. Elizabeth dismounted quickly, ran to him. "Uncle Henry! Uncle Henry, can you hear me?" Uncle Henry lay on his back. His eyes were open but unfocused. Blood pooled beneath his head, dark red against the brown dirt. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out, just a wet, gurgling noise. Elizabeth knelt beside him, checked his pulse. It was weak, thready, but he was still alive. She looked around. They were alone, far from the house. No witnesses. She could let him die naturally, wait for the blood loss to finish what the fall had started. But that might take too long, and Uncle Henry might say something before he died, something incriminating. Elizabeth reached into her riding jacket, pulled out a small glass vial, the one she always carried now, just in case. She uncorked it. Then she leaned close to Uncle Henry's face. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. "You should have stopped asking questions." Uncle Henry's eyes focused on her. For one terrible moment, he was completely lucid. His lips moved. "You?" "Yes, me." Elizabeth poured the contents of the vial into Uncle Henry's mouth. He tried to spit it out, tried to turn his head, but she held his jaw firm, made him swallow. The Trinity poison went down his throat. 3 drops, enough to stop his heart in minutes. She sat back and waited. Uncle Henry convulsed once. His back arched off the ground. His hands clutched at nothing. Blood bubbled from his mouth, from his nose. Then he went still. Elizabeth checked his pulse again. Nothing. He was dead. She stood and walked to Thunder. The horse was standing nearby, trembling, sweating. The poison in his system had made him violent. Perfect. Elizabeth took off Thunder's saddle and saddle pad, removed every glass seed she could find. Then she put the pad back on and resaddled the horse. She climbed back on her own horse, rode back to the estate as fast as she could. When she reached the house, she was screaming. "Help! Someone help! Uncle Henry has been thrown. He is hurt badly. We need Dr. Pemberton, now!" Servants ran from the house. Thomas appeared at the door. His face went white when he saw Elizabeth's expression. "Where is he?" Thomas demanded. "Out by the cotton fields. His horse threw him. He hit his head. There is so much blood." Elizabeth grabbed Thomas's arm. Her hands were shaking. Tears streamed down her face. "Thomas, I think he is dead." They rode out together, Thomas and 3 servants. When they reached Uncle Henry's body, Thomas dismounted and checked for pulse. He looked up at Elizabeth. His face was grave. "He is gone." One of the servants covered his mouth. Another one started praying. Elizabeth sat on her horse with tears running down her face and her hands trembling and guilt written all over her expression that she had carefully practiced in the mirror that morning. Dr. Pemberton arrived an hour later. He examined the body, looked at the head wound, checked Uncle Henry's eyes and mouth. Then he stood and walked to Thunder, examined the horse carefully, ran his hands along Thunder's back. His fingers found something. He pulled it out, held it up to the light. A tiny shard of glass, coated with something dark. Elizabeth's heart stopped. Dr. Pemberton looked at the glass, then at Thunder, then at Elizabeth. His expression was unreadable. "This horse has multiple lacerations on its back," he said quietly. Something sharp was embedded in the saddle pad. That is what caused the animal to panic and throw your uncle." "Could it have been thorns?" Thomas asked quickly. "Thunder might have rolled in a thistle patch." Dr. Pemberton turned the glass shard in his fingers. "This is not a thorn. This is glass, and it appears to be coated with some kind of residue." He sniffed it carefully, frowned. "I need to examine this more closely." "What are you suggesting?" Elizabeth asked. Her voice was shaking, not from fear, from anger. She had been so careful. How had she missed a piece of glass? "I am not suggesting anything yet," Dr. Pemberton said. But the way he looked at her said everything. He suspected. He knew something was wrong. He just could not prove it. The funeral was held 3 days later. It was smaller than James's funeral, quieter. People were starting to avoid the McAllister family. 4 deaths in less than a year. Father, James, Aunt Margaret, now Uncle Henry. The whispers had become loud enough that no one even tried to hide them anymore. "Cursed," they said. "That family is cursed." At the reception after the burial, Dr. Pemberton pulled Elizabeth aside. His expression was serious, almost sad. "Miss McAllister, I need to speak with you privately." "Of course, Doctor." They went to the study. Dr. Pemberton closed the door. He turned to face her, and for a long moment said nothing. Just looked at her with those tired eyes that had seen too much death. "I have been practicing medicine for 40 years, he finally said. "I have seen illnesses, accidents, natural deaths, and I have seen murder. Do you know how I can tell the difference?" Elizabeth's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back. "I do not. Patterns. Murder leaves patterns. 1 death is tragedy. 2 deaths is misfortune. 3 deaths is suspicious. 4 deaths?" He stepped closer. 4 deaths in one family in less than a year is not bad luck, Miss McAllister. It is systematic elimination. "Are you accusing me of something, Doctor?" "I am stating facts. Your father died of heart failure after exhibiting symptoms consistent with plant alkaloid poisoning. James died of cardiac arrest that was far more violent than any natural heart attack I have ever witnessed. Your aunt died peacefully, but showed signs of digitalis toxicity when I examined her body more carefully. And now your uncle has been thrown from a horse that had glass shards coated with an unknown substance embedded in its saddle pad." He pulled the glass shard from his pocket. "I had this analyzed by a chemist in Charleston. Do you know what he found?" Elizabeth said nothing. "Aconite, monkshood poison, one of the most toxic plant alkaloids known to medicine. Your mother kept monkshood in her greenhouse, did she not?" "My mother kept many plants." "And you have been spending significant time in that greenhouse every night for the past year. I have asked the servants. They all say the same thing. You go out there after dark and do not return for hours. What exactly are you doing in there, Miss McAllister?" Elizabeth met his eyes. "Botanical research. My mother's journals are fascinating." "I am sure they are." Dr. Pemberton walked to the window, looked out at the gardens, at the greenhouse in the distance. "Here is what I believe happened. I believe you poisoned your father with monkshood when he was weakened by pneumonia. I believe you poisoned James with a combination of plant alkaloids that caused massive cardiac arrest. I believe you slowly poisoned your aunt with digitalis until her heart gave out. And I believe you caused your uncle's death by coating glass shards with aconite and placing them in his horse's saddle pad." He turned back to face her. "The problem is, I cannot prove any of it. Plant alkaloids metabolize quickly. By the time I thought to test for them, the bodies had been buried. and even if I exhumed them now, the evidence would be degraded. All I have is suspicion and one glass shard covered in poison." Elizabeth said nothing, just stood there with her hands clasped behind her back and her face carefully neutral. "But I want you to know that I know," Dr. Pemberton continued. "I know what you are. I know what you have done, and I will be watching you very carefully from now on. If one more person in this family dies under suspicious circumstances, I will go to the authorities. I will demand an investigation. I will make such noise that they will have no choice but to listen. Do you understand me? I understand that you have made serious accusations with no evidence to support them." "That is correct, no evidence, which is why you are standing here free instead of in jail awaiting trial." He walked toward the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. "But I will find evidence eventually. Murderers always make mistakes, and when you make yours, I will be there to see it." He left. Elizabeth stood alone in the study with her heart pounding and her hands shaking and the terrible realization settling over her that Dr. Pemberton was a problem she could not ignore. That night, she sat in the greenhouse mixing a new poison, something different, something that would look like natural illness. Because Dr. Pemberton was right about one thing. She could not afford another suspicious death. Not yet. Not while he was watching so carefully. But she could be patient. She could wait. And when the time was right, Dr. Pemberton would die like everyone else who threatened her. Thomas came to the greenhouse at midnight. He looked exhausted, frightened. "Pemberton knows," he said without preamble. "I am aware. He told me after the funeral, said he suspects both of us, that he is watching us. Elizabeth, we have to stop. Now, before he finds proof." "We will stop, temporarily." "For how long?" 6 months, maybe a year. Long enough for suspicion to die down. Long enough for Pemberton to relax his vigilance. Then we continue." "And what about Rebecca and her daughter? They are still on the list." Elizabeth set down the vial she was holding. "Rebecca and Sarah can wait. Right now, we need to be invisible, perfect, beyond suspicion." "And if Pemberton keeps investigating?" "Then Pemberton dies, but not yet, not while he is expecting it." Elizabeth turned to face Thomas. "Do you trust me?" "No?" "Smart, but you're in this as deep as I am, so you will do exactly what I tell you. Smile, grieve, play the role of bereaved nephew, and in 6 months we will finish what we started." Thomas stared at her. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Elizabeth went back to her work. She had killed 4 people in less than a year, and she would kill 3 more before this was finished. Dr. Pemberton thought he could stop her by watching carefully. He was wrong. All he had done was make the game more interesting. She opened her ledger and wrote a new entry. August 1843. Henry McAllister. Dead. Cause: riding accident complicated by aconite poisoning. Dr. Pemberton suspicious. Temporarily ceasing operations. Remaining targets: 3. Rebecca Hammond, Sarah Hammond, and if necessary, Dr. Gregory Pemberton. She closed the ledger, locked it away. Then she sat in the dark greenhouse surrounded by poison plants and thought about the future she was building. One death at a time, one obstacle removed at a time, until there was no one left standing between her and total control. And if Dr. Pemberton got in her way, he would join the others in the ground. Just another name on her list. Just another problem solved. Elizabeth walked back to the house through gardens that smelled like roses and death. Tomorrow she would play the grieving niece. She would accept condolences with perfect grace. She would look Dr. Pemberton in the eye and dare him to prove anything, because proof was what mattered, and she was very good at making sure there was none.